Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month. You'll get unlimited access to the news you need to stay engaged and connected to your community. Visit DuluthNewsTribune.com/subscribe now to get 3 months of local news for only 99 cents a month.
Hello, Northlanders. It's Tuesday, June 18th. I'm Wyatt Buckner with the Duluth News Tribune Minute, presented by Minnesota Power Employees Credit Union.
The average MPECU member saves over $785 a year in better rates and lower fees. And with MPECU, every ATM is your ATM. With their free checking program, you get ATM fee reimbursements at any ATM anywhere in the U.S. Check out Minnesota Power Employees Credit Union's services online at mpecu.com or visit their offices in downtown Duluth, Arrowhead Road, or Miller Trunk Highway.
Now here's a look at today's headlines. A 75-year-old man was allegedly assaulted and robbed by 3 juveniles at the Duluth Entertainment Convention Center parking ramp Monday afternoon. Police responded at approximately 4:05 p.m. after the victim reported he was assaulted and robbed, according to a statement from Maddie Jelseth, Public Information Officer for the Duluth Police Department. The man sustained a minor injury but refused medical care. The victim said 3 juveniles were responsible for the assault and robbery. The juveniles were identified and located but are not in custody pending further investigation. The Violent Crimes Unit is investigating the report. A backpack belonging to the victim was still missing at the time of Jelseth's statement, made shortly after 6 p.m. Jelseth did not immediately respond to questions from the News Tribune regarding who reported the alleged assault and robbery and whether the victim had any prior knowledge of the alleged perpetrators. Leaders in the downtown community have recently pointed to progress in addressing concerns about safety in Duluth's Central Business District, which, like many cities' downtown areas, has seen change patterns of use since the onset of the coronavirus pandemic and subsequent decline in everyday foot traffic. The Duluth School Board is facing a slightly lower deficit than initially predicted, according to a report given by Director of Business Services Simone Zunich on Thursday. At a Committee of the Whole meeting, Zunich reported the 2024-2025 proposed budget for the second and final time before approval tonight with some updated numbers. Due to the sunset of federal COVID-19 funding, the district was predicted to contend with a $6.4 million deficit, thanks to an increase in staff training funding from the state legislature's passage of the Minnesota Reading to Ensure Academic Development Act, along with a slightly rosier outlook on enrollment and a few other funding increases. The district is budgeting for a $4.6 million deficit, to be offset by the assigned fund balance school districts are required to keep. The Minnesota Reading to Ensure Academic Development Act, according to Zunich, will come with an additional $349,000 allocation from the state to fund literacy-based training for teachers, which will help offset the funding already dedicated to training. The district's projected fall enrollment has increased from 7,989 to 7,999 for the adjusted average daily membership. The district receives funding with the basic formula of approximately $7,281 per pupil, a 2% increase from last year. Other funding changes include a $1.5 increase in title funding, the local levy increase of $2.6 million due to the first question passing during the fall referendum, and an additional 2% increase in the special education cross-subsidy aid. 2 of the major factors contributing to the projected deficit were the sunsetting of the federal government's elementary and secondary school emergency relief fund dollars, a change of $9.6 million, and increased costs due to a shift to the middle school model, and 7 period days at the high school. The budget is on the agenda for the regular board meeting at 6:30 p.m. today at the District Services Center at 709 Portia Johnson Drive. Now Dan Williamson joins us as the special guest.
Thanks, Wyatt. I'm joined by one of our colleagues, Jay Gabler, Duluth News Tribune arts and entertainment reporter, and Jay has a story that he's working on for Wednesday's print edition of the Duluth News Tribune. It's also a story that you can find on our website prior at DuluthNewsTribune.com. And Jay, we're talking Judy Garland.
That's right, Dan. The annual Judy Garland Festival is coming up this weekend at the Judy Garland Museum in Grand Rapids. That happens every year. It's always a big event for Judy Garland fans locally, nationally, around the world. But this year I wanted to particularly go up there and talk to the staff at the museum ahead of the festival, because there's been a lot of news about the Judy Garland Museum since the last Judy Garland Festival. The people most immediately behind the theft of the ruby slippers in 2005 from the museum have now been apprehended. It's brought a ton of attention to the museum, and now there's talk of potentially the museum being able to buy those ruby slippers to bring them permanently home to Grand Rapids.
Very interesting. And to your point, too, that has been all over the news. I know you and Wyatt Buckner had a chance to spend some time up there. For you, what was your biggest takeaway in covering this story?
I was surprised to learn. So I knew that there was a movement to potentially raise the money to purchase these ruby slippers to be permanently housed, on exhibit in Grand Rapids at the museum, which is there, in case people didn't know, because that's where Judy Garland was born. They literally have the house where she was born and first lived. The house has been moved a couple of times, but now it sits on a particular site in Grand Rapids, and there's the adjacent museum. And so the thought is, wow, if we could get a pair of their 4 certified pairs that Judy Garland wore while playing Dorothy Gale in The Wizard of Oz, if we get, that pair of ruby slippers to be on display in Grand Rapids, that would just be huge for tourism and heritage in Minnesota, the region, certainly northern Minnesota, the Northland here. So I knew that there was this movement to potentially buy those ruby slippers. I didn't realize that the clock is ticking on this purchase. The museum is currently fundraising, but the man who owns the slippers, the collector who they had been on loan from back in 2005 when they were stolen, they've now been returned to him, and he has announced plans to sell those ruby slippers whether or not this museum in Minnesota buys them. Apparently, right around the end of this calendar year, he's going to put them up for auction. And so by that time, the Judy Garland Museum is going to need to have the winning bid if we're going to bring those slippers home to Minnesota. So that'll be a story we will be continuing to follow throughout the year.
Interesting to maybe speculate. What do you think the cost would be?
Millions. It will certainly be millions of dollars. I think we're talking, at a bare minimum, $2 million, possibly much more. And staff at the museum were explaining that it makes fundraising a little bit tricky, because it's not like there's like some fixed amount that you can declare we're going for this amount and then we will have what we need to, for example, reopen the Duluth Armory, this kind of thing. It's like, what it's going to cost to build out this facility to do what you want with it. But in an auction situation, you really can't say what it's going to cost, nor should you be putting that out there publicly, what you have, right? You want to play your cards a little close to the vest, as you or I would, Dan, if we were going to go try to buy something at auction. So they need to raise the money they need while being a little bit cagey about how much they need, how much they have. And of course, it's all a guess as to, what the final auction price is going to be. So it's a real challenge they have before them, but, it would be certainly incredible for our region if they were able to make that buy. We talked about the fact that at the Museum of American History at the Smithsonian in Washington, think of all the artifacts they have. This is an entire Smithsonian museum full of all sorts of artifacts from across the entire span of American history. And what's the one thing that everybody absolutely has to go see when they go to that museum? It's their pair of ruby slippers. So this is an artifact really, at the very top rank of what could draw people to an institution. So they are very anxious to make this happen, but we'll see whether it happens. What we do know for sure is that the Judy Garland Festival is happening in Grand Rapids this weekend.
Absolutely. As far as our audience goes, what do you hope they take away from this story?
This is not a big part of this story. We're really talking specifically about Judy Garland, the festival, the slippers, all of this. But when Wyatt and I pulled up to the museum, the parking lot was full. And it wasn't full of people who had, certainly some of them had come from far and wide to see the Judy Garland part of the museum. But it was a lot of families, because the Judy Garland Museum is associated with, actually, it's the same organization, the same building as a Children's Discovery Museum, basically a big children's museum, kind of like we have here in Duluth. And a ton of people from the community just use that on a daily basis to take their kids on those cold, northern Minnesota days, or if it's rainy, or if they just want to have a place for their kids to play and meet up with other kids and whatever. It's a huge regional resource, that Children's Discovery Museum. And sometimes I think that is not mentioned when we're talking about the Judy Garland Museum, but that really is a big part of what they do at that organization, is provide this incredible place for kids to explore.
Well, Jay, very much looking forward to checking this article out. And again, it's an article you can check out in Wednesday's print edition of the Duluth News Tribune, as well as online prior at DuluthNewsTribune.com. You can also find photos and video from Wyatt Buckner. Jay, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Dan.
Wyatt, back to you.
Thanks, Dan. Now here's a look at your forecast, brought from the News Tribune's Northlandia podcast.
Good morning. Duluth area weather for today. Scattered showers and thunderstorms, most likely in the afternoon. Temperatures will likely warm up to about 80 degrees with breezy southeast winds around 10 to 20, occasionally gusting a little bit higher. Tonight, showers and thunderstorms early in the evening, then a slight chance later in the night. Temperatures dropping into the middle 50s, winds going south and then eventually turning a little bit more westerly. And Wednesday's forecast, mostly cloudy with a high temperature in the lower 70s, westerly winds at around 10 to 20. I'm Storm Tracker meteorologist John Wheeler.
Thank you to the Northlandia podcast for their support. The bi-weekly podcast explores curious and unique stories here in the Northland. The latest episode looks at scuba diving in Lake Orbegon. You can find that episode and others at DuluthNewsTribune.com or wherever you also get this podcast. Reporting for today's episode was done by Jay Gabler and Terry Caddo. Thank you for listening to Duluth News Tribune Minute. Have a great day, and we'll see you back here tomorrow.